And I'm thrilled to be joined now on the show by Danny Kanell, CBS college football analyst for our weekly edition of the Pac-12 Prime Picks, the best bets of the week. It was a slow start, then a hot run, and I've cooled off a little bit trying to get back into it. But Danny, I'm glad to see you here back on the show because your first appearance was the only undefeated week for my Pac-12 Prime Picks here, of course, brought to you by Bet Online, where you can bet all of these games. Odds here provided by Bet Online. So I'm hoping you can bring that mojo back to this week's picks.
That's what I'm hoping too. If I can be the good luck charm, I'll take it. I think we disagreed on one or two of our picks, so maybe that's what it was. You just need those competitive juices to get flowing, and maybe you can get that undefeated streak again this week. But I'm fired up to
Yeah,
be back.
Yeah, it was. We agreed on two that were correct, and then our disagreement. I had the edge on you just the one time. I don't know if that would have happened again had you been on last week, but it was UNLV covering the 13 at Cal. So
Mm.
hopefully let's get back to those winning ways, and let's start with the biggest game of the weekend in the Pac-12. We've all had it circled on our calendars for months. It's mildly disappointing, but not entirely for me at least, that Utah's got two losses. It's still a really big game. And here come the Utes, 3.5 point favorites, according to Bet Online, at home. Danny, I like them to win outright, and I think they can cover that 3.5 in Salt Lake City.
Spencer, I think you're a genius because I am on the same page as you. If you would have asked me before the season, where do you think USC will be as far as win total? I think I had them around between, I think it was 8.5. I would have said over, but not by much, like 9-3. I didn't think they would be 11-1. I didn't think they'd be 10-2. I think probably 9-3 or 8-4. Then, of course, the way it started, you're like, all right, I'm leaning towards 9. But if you went through the first 6 games, I would have said, and I'm sure you could comment on this too, they had a good chance of going 6-0. The way the schedule's set up, they got more the meaty part of the Pac-12 on the back end. Now they've had some nice wins, and one of the reasons I've been pleasantly surprised is the defense has played better when they've had to, when the offense has
Mm-hmm.
sputtered. But now's when you find out who the real USC is, and I think you're playing against a team that is a great environment at Rice Eccles. You're playing at altitude. They're playing with a little more desperation. They're playing with something to prove. And I think the UCLA game was more about UCLA being a really good team than it was about Utah having a down year or something like that. And I think Utah's physicality could present some problems for USC. I mean, even against UCLA, they still ran for 192 yards and averaged 4.5 yards per carry against the defense, which I think is more stout than USC's. I think Utah is really going to try to establish the line of scrimmage, and I think they'll have some success with it. And the USC offense, it's been good, but I don't think it's been great by any means. Like, I'm not ready to go say, hey, this is up there with the tier of Ohio State, which is where their expectations, where USC wants to be. I don't think they're there yet. Jordan Addison dinged up a little bit. Question marks about where he is health-wise. So I'm with you. I like the Utes playing at home as well.
So through the first 6 games coming into the year, I went through every team schedule in the Pac-12, and I had the Trojans at 5-1 at this point because I thought they would lose on the road at Oregon State, and the Beavs were right there. They very nearly had them, but that game is perhaps the biggest reason that USC is giving me pause about looking and going, oh, over a field goal, right? Even if Utah wins, I think USC could cover. I look at that game and go, they haven't shown up on the road offensively the way they have at home. And last week they played a very good defense in Washington State. That if anyone has watched the Cougars this year, you know that team is fast, they are physical, and they are well coached. So I wasn't surprised to see their offense kind of struggle to get it going or not have that explosion game and only put up 30 points for the Trojans and with Lincoln Riley at the helm. But now you're going against a Utah team that you touched on it, Danny. They are more motivated in this game than USC, and they are at home. I think both of those things work in favor of the Utes. Not that USC doesn't want to win and stay undefeated, and they still have, I think, something to prove because their wins so far have been solid, but they don't have that marquee win, right? It's their first chance to do that. But to me, Utah is going to be playing with a higher level of intensity from the jump because they've got two losses. If they want to win the Pac-12 championship, get back to the Rose Bowl and perhaps ultimately win the granddaddy of them all, they have to have this game. They have to have every game from here on out. And they're also a really, really good team at home. How do you feel that home field advantage factors into this line?
It's huge. Both parts. One, Rice Eccles is loud. Utah's got a great fan base, but I think almost more importantly, I played for the Denver Broncos at altitude when I was in the NFL. It's one of the bigger home field advantages. You know, the other team comes in, they're a little bit short of breath. They don't have as much oxygen getting to their muscles. You know, it does have an impact on them. So I absolutely think that home field plays a massive part. And if you haven't been to Rice Eccles, it's definitely a bucket list item. It's
Oh, it's
beautiful. It is
great.
a gorgeous day. That and Provo, at BYU, two of the best like picturesque backdrops. But who cares about the picturesque scene? You want loud, ruckus crowd, and that's what Utah is going to bring. And I could hear a USC fan right now being like, "What are you guys talking about? Like USC doesn't have the urgency." Every coach I've talked to, like, gets really nervous when their teams start having a lot of success and everybody's talking about how good they are and they're undefeated, and you start talking about the playoffs and you start, just looking ahead and you just start chalking in wins. Every coach despises that. You know what every coach loves? When kind of people are doubting you and they're saying, this isn't your year, and you're not playing as good and you're coming off a rough loss, because they know they'll have the players' attention. And it's not on game day. Both teams are going to want to win on game day. But it's when you come in to start watching the film, to start preparation, to start practicing. There's a little bit of an edge with a team like Utah that has thrived in this role, to be honest. And even though they're the favorite in this game, I guarantee you they feel like the underdog, which is a place Kyle Whittingham has really thrived there at Utah. So I'm with you on this one. I think they get it. I think you lay the 3.5 all day. I think this will be a big win. And I don't think it's a devastating loss for USC by any means. They'll still be very much, in control, could still contend for that Pac-12 championship. So I think it's going to be a physical, low-scoring game. I would lean towards the under as well on this one. I think Utah will control the line of scrimmage, and I think they'll slow down that prolific USC offense.
Yeah, I think that's the formula, and Oregon State kind of showed that. But the difference that Utah, I think, is going to be able to do is not turn the ball over 4 times the way Chance Nolan did. Cam Rising may throw one interception. He did last week. He also fumbled. Very uncharacteristic for him to have multiple turnovers. I think that's another guy who's going to want to come out and have his absolute best game of the season in the biggest game of the year to this point for Utah. Because if they lose this, Pac-12 championship probably out the door, and then the Utes have a very different vibe around that program. But we agree that they get it done. A team I thought would bounce back last week, and I actually went back and forth on this all week. I've talked about Washington, how I liked them coming back home, and Arizona's defense cannot stop a high school team at the moment. It seemed like Oregon went in and put up 49, and they just, that side of the ball is still growing in this rebuild under Jed Fish, which does appear to be well underway because they've got some really nice offensive pieces with Delora, Cowing, Singer, and T-Mac. That's a great quad of guys. I look at this game and I think Washington, kind of similar to Utah, has 2 losses. They feel like they should only have one because they went down and Michael Penix threw the ball off of the helmet of his own lineman and it was returned the other way for 6, or else Washington maybe escapes. And the vibe, I think, is different around the Huskies from the outside, at least. They're giving up 2 touchdowns here. I wish it was 13 and a half instead of 14, but I don't have to give up the extra half point, I guess. So you bring in maybe the possibility of a hook. I think Arizona can score points on this Washington secondary that is dealing with some injuries, has been exploitable the last couple of weeks. However, I still have more faith in that defense, particularly because this game is in Seattle, than I do Arizona's, who I've seen at home and on the road not be able to stop anybody this year. I think this is a big bounce back spot. I had that last week. I thought they'd win and cover at Arizona State, but now they're coming back home. I'm doubling down on the Huskies here, giving up 2 touchdowns.
I'm with you. I'm on the same side of you of this one. I think this is absolutely coming back home, one of those desperate spots for Kalen DeBoer. Has done a great job with Michael Penix. It's been a great story of those two coming back together after their time at Indiana when DeBoer was the offensive coordinator. And not to discredit Arizona, I think Jed Fish is doing a phenomenal job of building
Yes.
something. They're laying a foundation after what was a really atrocious year last year. You've seen an instant turnaround from this Arizona team. And Jaden Delora has been good when he's on, a little bit erratic, but he is, when he faces as much pressure as I do think he's going to face, playing on the road, crowd noise becomes an issue. Washington's defensive front, I do think, will harass him. I'm with you on this one. I think it's a big bounce back from Michael Penix, who I think will throw over for 300 yards. I think he'll kind of get back to his offensive ways where they'll get back to it. And I also think they'll be able to run the football. I think they'll be able to run on Arizona's defense. That hook terrifies me too. It just is one of those ones, but you just kind of have to suck it up and say, all right, Washington, it's your opportunity to shine. And you even want to have one of those, all right, we don't want to let this thing, our foot off the gas. We've lost 2 in a row. We want to come back, give our fans something to get excited about, let our players get some confidence back. So I think you could even see if there was ever a doubt about slowing up, taking off the gas, going to a 4-minute offense, I don't think Washington does that. I think they'll try to play a full 60 minutes, take it to Arizona, and I think they win and cover as well.
The way that I look at this game is Arizona went on the road against Cal, Danny, and lost by 18 by the time the game was done. So I'm looking at Washington and saying, well, who's a better team overall, Washington or Cal? Yeah, I like Washington at this point. Cal's defense maybe a little more consistent, but hasn't been as great statistically as they normally are with Justin Wilcox there. But the home field advantage, night and day. Seattle up here, Berkeley down here. Right? That's in kind of the Rose Bowl category for UCLA in terms of how good they are at home. And Arizona couldn't get any stops there. I mean, if you can't stop Cal on the road, I don't know how you stop Washington on the road, because the secondary has given up some big plays this year for Arizona. They've been really exploitable on the ground. Washington's been an air-heavy team, but if you allow them to have balance, you introduce that to their offense, which has been kind of hit and miss this year. I could really see Washington going for a similar number in that 49 to 50 range. And though I think the Arizona offense can score, I don't think they're going to go over 30. I think they'll probably be in the mid to high 20s.
Right. And Michael Penix coming off his worst game as a starter. I think you'll see Washington come out, try to establish the line of scrimmage, get that ground game going. And then kind of when you have a little bit of a lead, then you let Michael Penix get his confidence back, start taking some shots to the end zone, start working that pass game as well. So I'm with you in total agreement on this one. And I'll tell you, the sailgating scene is awesome there in Seattle.
So
it's
good.
one of the louder stadiums in the country, not just the Pac-12, in the country. The way the sound resonates and reverbs off the stands, it is one of the best atmospheres out there. And I think they'll be hungry and locked in on this one.
Yeah, and excuse me. And if they get upset in this game, then it's concern time, right? Arizona State
Absolutely.
on the road, like, okay, that sort of stuff happens. First year head coach, not time to panic. But if you lose this one at home, that would be worry time for Washington. But you and I in agreement, that's probably not going to happen. Last one that I've got in the prime picks this week. Again, if it were just a half point lower, I might feel better. But Stanford going to Notre Dame, who's suddenly starting to play some better football. They just knocked off BYU in Las Vegas. Stanford to me is a little bit like Colorado right now. I'm going to fade them every chance I get because I just don't see anything that makes me feel encouraged. And especially, Danny, they're going on the road after gifting away a game to Oregon State, who, to their credit, went out and took the opportunity when it was presented to them. But Stanford's been bad. It looked like they had their first win of the season, and then all of a sudden they didn't. I worry about what the vibe is in that locker room. Questions should continue to swirl about David Shaw as the head coach. Like, nothing working for Stanford here, whereas Notre Dame suddenly is over 500, could get to an 8 or 9 win season for their first year head coach, who they all seem to love. They're at home. 17, it's a lot of points. And in Stanford's 2 road games this year against Washington and Oregon, who I think have better offenses than Notre Dame, they've lost by just an average of 18 points a game. But I think emotionally, Stanford's in a place where they could go out and really only score 10 points.
I hate all the agreement, but I am with you on this one. And you know what else I kind of worry about? Because David Shaw is one of my favorite coaches in
Great
the
guy.
sport. And I think he's one of the better coaches in the sport. But if you look back since 2019, 4-8, 4-2 in the COVID season, but then 3-9 last year, starting off 1-4 with not a win against an FBS opponent. And it felt like, man, maybe they were going to all of a sudden, because I do think you get great effort from David Shaw's squad, and you see a team that still fights, and they had that game. You're right, and they totally, found a way to lose that game, except for a miraculous final play. It's It's tough. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it's a change of scenery. Like, if you just need some like Duke did that this year. They had David Cutcliffe, another guy that I liked a tremendous amount. It's a similar type program that has academic, I don't know, restrictions. Like, it's harder to recruit at a Duke and it's harder to recruit at a Stanford. They made a change almost for change's sake, just kind of freshen things up. I don't know if Stanford should do that because, again, like you're parting with a really good coach, but I do wonder if it's getting to be time where there's going to be some really tough questions that'll have to be asked. And if David Shaw gets to start somewhere else, he might go somewhere else and totally crush it. But I do look at the Stanford team, and I think the talent gap is probably the thing that's most concerning. And I think it's going to be on display in this game. I mean, EJ Smith, when he went down, it was like, oh, that was the one bright spot. And historically, if you look at when Stanford has played well, they've had workhorse backs, like they've had somebody, whether going back to Toby Gerhart, Christian McCaffrey, they've always had kind of that guy, and they just haven't been able to find it. So I'm with you on this one. And then you are right about Notre Dame. This to me is about Notre Dame. They lost their quarterback, Ty Buckner, after a few games. They started 0-2. They lose to Marshall. Everybody's like, oh, Marcus Freeman's a disaster. What's going to happen at Notre Dame? Then all of a sudden, Drew Pine comes in. He starts to develop a rapport, and you start remembering, oh, this Notre Dame team is pretty talented. They have a pretty talented roster. You're seeing some guys start to pop, and they had a really nice win in Las Vegas against BYU, who is a really good football team. I think you're seeing one team who had their kind of last-ditch desperate effort to possibly get that win against Oregon State, deflating loss the way it happened. Then they got to go on the road and play a team that is coming back playing with a ton of confidence, who also, by the way, because of those first two losses, Stanford kind of needs some style points. They need some, all right, like, let's start giving us some attention for recruits, for national conversation. And I think Notre Dame, unfortunately, gets it here against Stanford. So I'm with you on the Fighting Irish as well. I think this is going to be a long, tough uphill day for the Stanford Cardinal.
Yeah, and their defense too has really struggled this year to stop the run, which is so uncharacteristic for Stanford, but that's been a theme the last couple of years, really, is they have been a porous run defense, and Notre Dame has not been particularly explosive through the air. But what do they want to do? What do defensive coaches typically want to do? Run the football, and you can do that on this Stanford group. So agreement across the board: Notre Dame -17, Washington -14, and Utah -3.5. Last thing, Danny, I want your thoughts on a game that, from a betting perspective, I'm not touching with a 10-foot pole, and that's Washington State at Oregon State, which should be a great football game. It's in Corvallis. Beavs are coming back home. They're at 4-2, which is a solid place for them to be at this point. They've escaped against Fresno State and Stanford with wins. That makes me less confident in them. But at home, they play their best football. Washington State's defense, though, is really good. And whether or not you have Chance Nolan, I question whether the Bees could take care of the ball. I feel like it could be an Oregon State win, Washington cover sort of situation. I went back and forth, but I just couldn't come down confidently on a side to put it in the prime picks.
I'm with you. This game, to me, feels like a toss-up. Both teams have kind of had their moments at various times this season. Love the direction, both programs. I'd say Chance Nolan, is it possible to trust him? I don't know, because of some of the up and down hiccups that he's had. I'd lean toward Washington State in this one. I do think this will be a field goal type game. So if you're getting 3.5, I'd say go ahead and take Washington State there in this one. I think it'll be a physical test that comes down to the wire. I'm going to go ahead and take Washington State in this one in those points.
I think that's where I would go. I'm just like, in Corvallis, the Beavs are a really good team at home. Remember, they should have beaten USC there. They didn't lose at home last year. They beat Utah. They were the only Pac-12 team to beat Utah a year ago. And this season, they've been impressive. They wrecked Boise State. They were up 24-0 at home. It's just, it scares me. So I think stay away. But if you really want to just bet every game, of course, go to BetOnline. All odds are provided by BetOnline here at the Locked On Podcast Network, and consider the Cougs, but maybe go with the favorites this week that we alluded to. Danny Kanell, CBS college football analyst. Appreciate you coming back, and fingers crossed for another 3-0 week. I'm sitting at 500 on the year right now, so I got to get in the green. Hopefully, our uniform agreement across the board is indicative of good things to come.
Let's hope so, because I don't want to be the cooler. I don't want to come in here and we go 1-2 or something like that. So I'll be watching these picks closely and hopefully for an undefeated weekend.
Yes, indeed. Appreciate everyone listening. See you next time and have a wonderful rest of your day.